King Charles had arrived at Balmoral expecting a controlled briefing about the future of the monarchy. Instead, one unexpected face in a silent corridor changed everything. Standing only yards from the private conference room was Queen Camilla's personal solicitor, a man who had not been invited, had not been cleared, and should never have known the meeting was taking place. Within minutes, Charles cancelled the entire briefing and ordered the doors sealed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles slowed before the corridor turned toward the conference room. Senior household officials, estate advisors, and constitutional aides were waiting inside to discuss royal residences, funding, and Camilla's position. A constitutional aide is an official who helps the sovereign understand how private decisions may affect the crown's public duties. This was no routine meeting. Every paper touched the dangerous line between a husband's promises and a monarch's obligations. The king stopped mid-step. Adrian Mercer stood beside the closed door with a narrow burgundy case marked with Camilla's private monogram. Charles recognized him immediately. He lowered the folder in his hand and stared without speaking. Mercer offered a greeting, but the silence felt colder than an accusation. The solicitor had no invitation, no security clearance, and no reason to know the meeting's exact time or location. A security officer approached and asked what the case contained. Mercer tightened his grip and replied that he could discuss it only with the Queen Consort. The title means the reigning king's wife, a position carrying royal status, but no independent sovereign authority. That answer changed everything. Camilla was supposed to be elsewhere at Balmoral. Charles had been assured she would not attend, making her lawyer's arrival feel deliberate rather than accidental. Charles turned to the equerry beside him. An equerry is a senior aide who supports the monarch's duties and private movements. The king ordered the briefing cancelled, every paper removed, and the corridor sealed until Mercer's purpose was established. His voice never rose. It did not need to. Officials began leaving in silence, but Charles remained beside the door. One envelope on the briefing trolley caught his attention. Its wax seal had already been broken. He lifted it, studied the torn edge, and understood that the solicitor's presence might be only part of the betrayal. Someone had reached the information before the monarch entered the room. But to understand why the sight of one solicitor could silence an entire royal meeting, the people standing on either side of that corridor had to be understood, not as titles, but as husband, wife, advisor, and heir. The cancelled briefing was not merely a security incident. It struck directly at the most fragile relationship inside the monarchy. Charles saw a legal representative, where he expected trust. Camilla saw protection where her husband saw intrusion. And Prince William, informed within the hour, recognized something even more dangerous. A private marital dispute was beginning to shape official royal decisions, and the boundary between family loyalty and constitutional duty was collapsing. Charles shut himself inside a small private study and placed Adrian Mercer's name card beside the unopened briefing papers. The king removed his glasses, pressed 2 fingers against his eyes, and stared at both objects without speaking. A royal briefing is a confidential meeting where advisors prepare the sovereign to make decisions affecting the household and the wider institution. That secrecy mattered because the cancelled discussion involved residences, private funding, staff arrangements, and Camilla's future place within royal life. The monarch had defended her through decades of public anger, family resistance, and humiliating headlines. He had stood beside her when doing so carried a personal cost. That history made the solicitor's unexplained appearance feel worse than a procedural breach. Charles did not see a lawyer waiting in a corridor. He saw evidence that the woman he had protected might no longer trust him to protect her. Camilla received the news from her private secretary behind a closed door. Her face tightened when she learned that her husband had personally ordered the corridor sealed and suspended access to the meeting room. The queen consort, the wife of the reigning king, without the monarch's independent constitutional power, understood how exposed her position could become. Residences could be reassigned, staff could be reduced, ceremonial privileges could change. She looked at the secretary and asked only, "Did he speak to Adrian?" William heard the answer before she did. During a secure telephone call, the prince listened as his father described the Burgundy case, the broken envelope, and the solicitor's refusal to explain himself. The future king chose his words carefully. He told Charles that unauthorized legal involvement could not be dismissed as a domestic misunderstanding, because private lawyers had no place inside confidential planning for the crown. Mercer's history made that warning sharper. He had represented Camilla during earlier negotiations involving personal property, employment agreements, and assets connected to members of her family. His presence therefore reached far beyond one cancelled meeting. It suggested preparation, fear, and perhaps a private strategy already in motion. Camilla requested an immediate conversation with her husband. Charles refused. The king instructed an aide to document why Mercer had traveled to Balmoral, who had informed him of the briefing, and what the case contained before husband and wife met alone. Yet the solicitor had not appeared without warning. One earlier confrontation had pushed Camilla toward legal protection, and that forgotten exchange was about to return as the true beginning of the crisis. 3 weeks before the Balmoral cancellation, a private dinner ended with a sentence Camilla could not forget. There were no cameras, no public announcement, and no official record prepared for the household. Only Charles, Camilla, William, and one sealed folder remained in the room. When the king revealed that future decisions concerning Balmoral would be reviewed without outside family lawyers, the queen understood exactly what was changing, and exactly how little control she might retain. Charles waited until the final course had been cleared before sliding the folder across the table at Clarence House. A memorandum is a formal written note setting out a decision, proposal, or policy for those expected to act on it. This one dealt with royal residences, private estates, and arrangements that would take effect after a future change of reign. The monarch told them that every discussion from that point forward would be handled only by crown advisors, meaning officials serving the institution, rather than any individual member of the family. Camilla did not open the envelope. She placed 2 fingers against the seal and asked whether the restriction applied specifically to Adrian Mercer. Charles answered that it applied to everyone. His voice remained calm, but the queen heard something colder beneath it. To her, the decision was not neutral. It removed the one man she trusted to protect her interests when affection, duty, and property became dangerously tangled. William sat across from them and said nothing. The prince watched his father straighten the papers beside his plate, while Camilla's expression hardened. She accused the household of preparing for a future in which she would be treated as an inconvenience rather than the king's wife. The future monarch finally spoke, telling her that succession planning was not a judgment on her worth. She answered that people usually called it planning when they were too afraid to call it removal. Charles opened the memorandum himself. The document proposed a firm separation between property controlled by the crown, assets owned personally by the sovereign, and arrangements intended to benefit Camilla or members of her family. That division mattered because a personal promise from one king could not automatically bind the next. It also mattered because homes, staff, security, and access could define whether the queen entered the future with dignity or dependence. Camilla left the table without touching the folder. The following morning, she contacted Mercer through a recorded private call and instructed him to review every assurance she had received about residences, financial support, staff protection, and continued access to royal property. The solicitor warned that vague promises could collapse during a transition. especially if they had never been written into enforceable agreements. Mercer later learned through a message from her private office that the Balmoral briefing would review the same memorandum. Camilla authorized him to travel north and prepare a legal response, but she did not tell Charles. By the time the king saw him outside that restricted room, the decision had already become a confrontation. When Charles finally discovered that the corridor encounter had begun with Camilla's direct instruction, the crisis could no longer be contained by staff, sealed folders, or carefully chosen messages. The confrontation took place without advisors, secretaries, or legal representatives. Charles entered the sitting room carrying no documents. Camilla was already waiting beside the fireplace, her hands clasped so tightly that her rings pressed into her skin. The king closed the door himself. Then, without offering a greeting, he asked the question that had been hanging over Balmoral since the briefing was cancelled. "Did you send him to that corridor?" Camilla held his gaze for only a moment before sitting down. Charles remained standing, and the silence between them became unbearable. She rose again and admitted that she had authorized Adrian Mercer to travel to Scotland. The Queen insisted, however, that she had never told him to enter the restricted corridor or approach the meeting room. A restricted corridor is an area limited to cleared staff, because conversations, papers, and movements there may involve confidential royal business. Charles stepped closer. His anger sharpened as he asked how the solicitor knew the exact time, the precise room, and the subject under discussion. Camilla looked away before answering that someone from the household must have contacted him. The monarch heard the hesitation in her voice. He asked whether she knew who had done it. She said no, but the pause before that answer carried more weight than the word itself. Camilla's fear finally broke through her restraint. She accused her husband of discussing her future as though she were already absent, powerless, and waiting to be removed. Charles answered that the briefing concerned the monarchy, not a punishment against her. The king reminded her that residences, staff, and access could not be settled only through private affection, when those decisions might bind a future sovereign. The Queen reached for a written account Mercer had left with her office. It confirmed that he carried a draft legal notice, challenging any decision affecting her residence rights, or continued access to jointly used royal properties without prior consultation. A legal notice is a formal warning that someone may challenge a decision if their rights are ignored. Charles read the first lines, then placed the page down with controlled disgust. William's name entered the room like another accusation. The monarch said the future king had already warned that personal representation could not enter constitutional planning. Camilla heard only one message. The prince had influenced the restrictions, and her husband had listened. Charles rejected that claim, but he did not deny that William's concerns had shaped the discussion. The king made his decision without raising his voice. Until the source of the leak was identified, neither Mercer nor any member of Camilla's private office would receive confidential Balmoral schedules. She stared at him as though the order had drawn a line through their marriage. But Charles's command could close a corridor, not settle the struggle beneath it, because the real authority over the contested arrangements rested in a network even the king could not control alone. Charles was king, but kingship did not mean absolute ownership. The Balmoral papers drew lines even he could not erase with a private promise. Some assets belonged personally to the sovereign. Others were protected by trusts, legal settlements, historical agreements, and obligations extending beyond one marriage. As Charles sat before 3 senior advisors, he faced a truth more humiliating than the corridor intrusion. Defending Camilla emotionally did not give him unrestricted power to secure everything she feared losing. Charles opened the meeting with a single demand. He wanted every boundary explained without ceremony, soft language, or delay. The cancelled briefing had concerned control, residence, and access, rather than a simple division of wealth. Trustees are people legally required to protect property or money for a defined purpose, while estate officers manage the practical use of royal land and residences. Their approval mattered because some arrangements could not be altered by personal instruction alone. Sir Jonathan Vale placed the first paper before him. The senior advisor explained that the king could provide Camilla with private funds, personal property, and written assurances drawn from assets he owned directly. He could not, however, force a future sovereign to preserve every promise involving crown-linked residences, official staff, security resources, or ceremonial privileges. William's eventual authority could not be permanently restricted by a private agreement made during his father's reign. The monarch set down his pen. "Does my word carry any meaning inside my own family?" he asked. Vale did not answer quickly. He told Charles that his word carried enormous moral weight, but moral force and legal control were not the same. The advisor warned that ignoring established safeguards might protect Camilla today while creating a constitutional conflict for the future king tomorrow. Charles turned to the envelope whose seal had been broken before the original meeting. Inside lay a proposed transition protocol. A transition protocol is a formal plan explaining how roles, homes, staff, security, and ceremonial access would change when one reign ended and another began. The document defined Camilla's position if William inherited the throne, including which protections could continue automatically and which would require fresh approval. Vale then revealed the most damaging detail through a documented security report. One paragraph had been copied before the briefing. It concerned the possible return of selected rooms at Clarence House and Balmoral to direct sovereign use after a transition. Those words would have confirmed Camilla's deepest fear, that familiar spaces could be reclaimed once Charles no longer held the crown. The final page changed suspicion into crisis. Investigators had traced the copy to a machine inside the Queen's private office. Charles read the line twice. The leak had not come from an unknown intruder or a distant official. It had come from someone working close enough to Camilla to know exactly what frightened her. By evening, the legal dispute had become an internal investigation, and the first consequences fell not upon the solicitor in the corridor, but upon the woman who had sent for him. The new reality arrived through small, unmistakable changes. A diary was removed. A keycard stopped working. A familiar aide was told to surrender a secure telephone. Nothing was announced beyond Balmoral, yet Camilla felt the walls narrowing around her. For the first time since becoming queen, she was not merely facing criticism from the public. She was being separated from the private machinery of the household by an order signed by her own husband. Camilla's private office lost access to restricted Balmoral schedules before breakfast. Adrian Mercer's visitor clearance was revoked, and 2 aides were removed from confidential correspondence duties while the investigation continued. A visitor clearance is formal permission, allowing someone to enter protected royal areas after security checks. Without it, the solicitor could not return to the estate, approach official rooms, or meet staff involved in sensitive planning. The Queen watched her private secretary place a disabled security pass on the table. She turned it over twice, as though the black strip might somehow explain what had happened. Then she asked the question she already feared answering. Did Charles approve this himself? The secretary lowered her eyes and said yes. Camilla dismissed her quietly, closed the door, and remained beside a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Charles felt the cost from another wing of the castle. He saw his wife cross the courtyard alone and nearly moved toward her, but stopped before reaching the door. The king understood why the restrictions were necessary. Confidential schedules revealed where meetings happened, who attended them, and when sensitive papers changed hands. Yet every safeguard protecting the monarchy now looked, from Camilla's side, like a punishment delivered through bureaucracy. The investigation soon found its first name. A documented security interview traced the copied paragraph to Eleanor Shaw, a junior administrative aide in the Queen's office. She admitted sending the passage to Mercer after being told that Camilla required urgent legal advice. Eleanor insisted she believed the request carried full authority from her employer, and that delay might leave the monarch's wife unprotected. Camilla denied ordering anyone to copy the document. She repeated that denial during a recorded private meeting with the investigating officer, but she did not hide behind it. The Queen admitted that her fear had infected the office around her. By speaking as though removal were already being planned, she had made loyal staff believe ordinary rules no longer mattered. William arrived at Balmoral before nightfall. The prince did not come to shame her or defend his father without question. He came because he understood that the institution could survive one leaked paragraph, while the family might not survive another day of speaking through advisors. That night, William asked for a conversation no briefing paper could control, and the decision reached inside that room would determine whether the family fractured or finally faced the truth. There were 3 chairs in the room, and no table between them. William had requested it that way. No folders, legal notes, secretaries, or recording devices were permitted. Charles entered first. Camilla arrived moments later and chose the chair furthest from her husband. The prince closed the door, remained standing, and told them both that the monarchy could survive a legal disagreement, but it could not survive a family using institutions to avoid speaking honestly. William refused to begin with the leaked paragraph. He told them each to explain what they feared losing before anyone defended a decision. The future king spoke with quiet authority because the dispute was no longer only about a document. It threatened his father's marriage, Camilla's security, and the freedom of the next reign. A future reign means the period when the next sovereign takes the throne and gains responsibility for royal property, staff, duties, and constitutional decisions. Camilla answered first. She admitted that her legal preparations had not begun with greed. They had begun with fear. The Queen believed that once Charles could no longer protect her, every home, every member of staff, and every private assurance might depend on the goodwill of people who had never fully accepted her. She had spent years building a life inside the monarchy, yet one change of reign could leave her feeling like a guest waiting to be asked to leave. Charles listened without interrupting. Then the king admitted what he had been unable to say in the corridor. Seeing Adrian Mercer outside that room made him feel that his wife had prepared to fight him before he had even made a decision. He said the cancellation was not revenge. It was the only action strong enough to stop private fear from taking control of official royal planning. William finally sat opposite Camilla. The prince told her that preparing for his future reign did not mean wishing for his father's absence. His voice remained steady until he reached the final words, then faltered. He looked toward Charles before continuing. The future monarch would not allow planning for duty to be turned into a prediction of loss. The prince offered a way forward. He would support a written personal settlement guaranteeing Camilla dignity, security, an appropriate residence, a protected private household, and protection from public humiliation. A personal settlement is a binding arrangement covering an individual's private needs without controlling the institution itself. It could protect her future, but it could not restrict the authority of the next sovereign. Camilla accepted the boundary. She agreed to remove Mercer from every matter involving crown-linked property, while keeping independent advice for assets that truly belonged to her. Charles then moved his chair closer to hers. The king told William that the cancelled briefing would be reconvened only after all 3 approved the new language. The private settlement ended the family confrontation, but secrecy could not survive much longer, because by morning, the image of the solicitor in the Balmoral corridor had reached the outside world. By sunrise, the corridor was no longer private. The cancelled meeting, the solicitor's appearance, and the suspension of Camilla's office reached broadcasters in a single dramatic sequence. What had begun as a dispute over access became a national argument about trust, marriage, succession, and power. Outside Balmoral's gates, Cameras gathered before the palace issued a word. Across Britain, one question dominated every headline. Why had the king cancelled his own briefing after seeing his wife's lawyer? The Crown Chronicle carried the defining image. Its front page showed Balmoral's closed iron gates, beneath the words, "The corridor that stopped the king." A front page is the newspaper's most prominent page, reserved for the story editors believe matters most. The headline turned one private encounter into a symbol of something larger: a marriage under strain, a monarchy protecting its future, and a queen fighting not to disappear from it. A broadcaster outside the estate rejected the language of simple scandal. She described the crisis as a clash between private legal protection and the continuity of the crown. The principle that royal authority must pass securely from one sovereign to the next. That framing mattered because the dispute was no longer only about Camilla's fear or Charles's anger. It was about whether personal promises could shape the powers of a future reign. A small crowd gathered near the Balmoral entrance before midday. One elderly royal watcher stood near the barriers, holding a handwritten sign that read, "Speak as a family, not through lawyers." The message was simple, but it captured the public mood. People were tired of sealed doors, private advisors, and family disputes becoming institutional crises. Charles watched the broadcast in silence beside Sir Jonathan Vale. When the presenter suggested he had cancelled the briefing in a burst of anger, the king switched off the television. He told the advisor that the public deserved a statement based on the final agreement, not speculation built around a corridor. Vale agreed, and began preparing language that protected the institution without humiliating anyone inside it. Camilla read the newspaper alone. She folded it once, then again, until the photograph of the gates disappeared. Her sadness hardened into resolve. The Queen authorized her office, through a documented statement, to confirm that Adrian Mercer no longer represented her in matters involving crown-linked property, succession planning, or official royal access. The palace response followed. The Balmoral meeting would be reconvened with tighter safeguards, while a jointly approved private settlement would protect Camilla's dignity without restricting William's future authority. Charles, Camilla, and the prince then prepared to enter the same briefing room together, through the main door, with no personal solicitor waiting outside. The world had seen the doors close in suspicion. The final verdict would be delivered by the way the three figures chose to reopen them. 4 days after Charles cancelled the Balmoral briefing, the same room opened again. The chairs had been reset. The breached papers had been replaced. Security officers stood farther down the corridor, and no unapproved advisor was present. Yet the greatest change could not be found in any official document. Charles, Camilla, and William entered together, carrying an agreement shaped not by victory or defeat, but by the painful recognition that trust required limits, honesty, and consequence. Charles paused outside the conference room, where the crisis had begun. He looked once toward the empty stretch of corridor where Adrian Mercer had stood, then opened the door himself. The king did not hesitate this time. A personal residence arrangement is a legally protected agreement securing someone's home without giving them permanent control over property connected to the crown. That distinction now stood at the heart of the settlement. Camilla would receive a secure residence, continued protection, a defined private household, and financial dignity. She would not be left dependent on private goodwill or exposed to sudden humiliation. Crown-linked property, however, would remain under the authority of the reigning sovereign. The Queen had gained protection, but not the power to restrict William when his own reign eventually began. Mercer's role ended completely. A documented household order permanently excluded him from confidential royal planning, institutional residences, succession arrangements, and discussions involving crown resources. Camilla accepted the decision without protest. She understood that independent advice could protect her personal assets, but secrecy inside official planning had nearly destroyed the trust she was trying to preserve. Eleanor Shaw also faced the consequences. The junior aide accepted responsibility in a recorded internal interview and agreed to leave her confidential post. Camilla asked that she not be publicly disgraced. The Queen admitted that fear, vague instructions, and pressure inside her office had helped create the breach. Punishment was necessary, but cruelty would not repair what had been broken. Charles reached across before the meeting began and placed his hand briefly over his wife's. "Protection cannot be built through secrecy," he told her. Camilla held his gaze and answered, "And loyalty cannot survive without security." The words did not erase the damage, but they finally named the truth beneath it. William accepted the agreement without triumph. The prince understood that protecting the monarchy did not require humiliating Camilla. She understood that securing her future could not come at the cost of limiting his eventual authority. The future king had not defeated her. He had helped create boundaries strong enough to protect everyone. The meeting proceeded. The corridor remained empty, and the doors stayed open. Charles regained trust in his household. Camilla gained security without secret influence. William inherited proof that authority is strongest when restrained by compassion. The cancellation had seemed like anger. In the end, it forced a family to stop negotiating through fear and speak honestly. For the monarchy, that was more than a private resolution. It was a restoration of order. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.